Today, we will talk about biggest scandals in modern history and what we can learn from them. How the US President Nixon and his helpers covered up a break-in and went to jail for being dishonest. Why American soldiers did very bad things to prisoners in Iraq and got in big trouble. How Albert Fall took money from a company, let them use Navy oil fields and went to jail. Why a company building a railroad cheated by presents to government people for help. How in Italy politicians and business people got caught giving and taking bribes in the Bribesville scandal. And finally, we will talk about how Enron's bosses lied about the company's money. It went bankrupt and how they went to jail. Imagine you're playing a game with your friends and you really want to win, but instead of playing fair, you decide to cheat by peeking at your friends' cards when they're not looking. That's kind of what happened in the Watergate scandal, but on a much bigger scale. Back in 1972, Richard Nixon was US president. He was like the leader of the whole country. President Nixon had some helpers who worked for him, and they all wanted him to win the next election so he could keep being president. Nixon's helpers had a bad idea. They thought that if they could spy on the people running against Nixon in the election, it would help him win. So they decided to break into the office of the other team, called the Democratic National Committee, in a building named Watergate. This way they could listen to the other team's plans and secrets. When President Nixon found out about this, he should have told the truth and punished the people who did the bad thing. But instead, he tried to cover it up and pretend like he didn't know anything about it. The leaders in Congress, which helps make laws for the country, Nixon by removing him from his job as president. This is called impeachment. But before Congress could impeach him, Nixon decided to quit his job as president. Many of Nixon's helpers, like his Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman and Attorney General John Mitchell, also got in big trouble for helping with the break-in and the cover-up. They had to go to prison as punishment. The Watergate scandal taught us that even the President of the United States has to follow the rules and tell the truth. 2. In Iraq, there was a big war going on. The United States sent its soldiers there to fight in the war. One of the places where the American soldiers were staying was a prison called Abu Ghraib. Now in a war, when soldiers capture people from the other side, they are supposed to take care of them and make sure they are safe. These captured people are called prisoners of war. There are special rules that all countries agree on about how to treat prisoners of war. These rules say that you can't hurt them, scare them, or be mean to them. But something very bad happened at Abu Ghraib prison. Some of the American soldiers there started being very cruel to the Iraqi prisoners. They did things that they weren't supposed to do, things that would get them in big trouble. The soldiers would beat the prisoners, which means they would hit them and make them feel pain. Sometimes the soldiers would make the prisoners stand in very painful positions for a long time, like making them stand on their toes or hold their arms out until they felt like they couldn't do it anymore. The soldiers thought that nobody would find out about the bad things they were doing. But one day, someone took pictures of the soldiers hurting the prisoners. These pictures were leaked to the media. The military, which is in charge of the soldiers, started an investigation to find out exactly what happened and who was responsible. 2 of the soldiers who did the most bad things were Specialist Charles Grainer and Private First Class Lynndie England. Specialist Grainer and Private England were put on trial. The court found out that they were guilty of abusing the prisoners. Specialist Grainer was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Private England was sentenced to 3 years in prison. What happened at Abu Ghraib was very wrong. It violated the international laws about how to treat prisoners of war. After the scandal, the United States military made changes to try to make sure something like this would never happen again. 3. In United States, Albert worked for the president, Warren G. Harding. His job was to take care of the country's land and resources, like forests, parks, and oil fields. One of these oil fields was called Teapot Dome, and it was in a state called Wyoming. Teapot Dome was special because it belonged to the Navy, and the oil from it was supposed to be saved for emergencies. However, Albert Fall had a secret plan. He decided to let a private oil company use Teapot Dome without telling anyone else about it. Instead, he made a secret deal with just one company. This company gave Albert a lot of money as a thank you for letting them use Teapot Dome. This thank you money is called a bribe, and it's illegal. When people found out about Albert's secret deal and the bribes he took, they were very angry. He had to go to court, and the judges decided that what he did was against the law. Albert became the first person who worked directly for the president, a cabinet member, to go to jail for crimes he committed while working in the government. This event is remembered as the Teapot Dome scandal. It taught us that people who work for the government have a special responsibility to be honest and work for the good of everyone, not just for themselves. After the scandal, new laws were made to prevent things like this from happening again. 4. In United States, there was a big project to build a railroad. This railroad was going to be very special because it would connect one side of the country to the other. It was called the Union Pacific Railroad. Building a railroad is a huge job. It takes a lot of people, a lot of time, and a lot of money. The company in charge of building this railroad was called Crédit Mobilier. The bosses of this company were always looking for ways to get more money to help build the railroad. Now, there's a group of people in the United States called Congress. They are chosen by the people to make important decisions and laws for the whole country. They are supposed to do what's best for everyone. The bosses of Crédit Mobilier had an idea. They thought, hey, if we can get the people in Congress to like us, maybe they will give us more money to build the railroad. So, they came up with a sneaky plan. Usually, when you buy a share in a company, you have to pay the full price. But the Crédit Mobilier bosses told some of the most powerful people in Congress, hey, we'll let you buy shares in our company, but you don't have to pay the full price. You can pay less than everyone else. This was like offering them a special discount, just because they were in Congress. The bosses thought that if these congressmen owned shares in Crédit Mobilier, they would want the company to do well so they could make more money. And guess what? It worked! The congressmen who got these special discounts on shares started doing things to help Crédit Mobilier. They voted to give the company more money from the government, which is called a subsidy. They also made special laws that made it easier for Crédit Mobilier to build the railroad. This was a big problem. The congressmen were supposed to make decisions based on what was best for the whole country, not what was best for a company they owned part of. They were supposed to be fair, but instead, they were giving special treatment to Crédit Mobilier. Some very important people got caught up in this scandal. The vice president at the time, Schuyler Colfax, was one of the people who bought these special shares. A congressman named James Garfield, who later became the president of the United States, was also involved. The scandal was discovered in 1872, when Ulysses S. Grant was the president. However, most of the bad stuff actually happened a few years earlier. When Andrew Johnson was president, people were upset because they trusted the congressman to be honest and fair. They didn't think it was right for them to use their power to help a company they owned part of. It was like they were cheating to get more money. There was a big investigation to find out exactly what happened and who was involved. In the end, a lot of people got in trouble. The Crédit Mobilier scandal taught us a very important lesson. It showed us that people in power, like congressmen, have to be extra careful not to use their position to help themselves or their friends. In the early 1990s, Italy went through a very difficult time. It all started with a big scandal that people called Tangentopoli. In Italian, it means Bribesville. You see, in Italy, there were a lot of politicians and businessmen who were doing things they weren't supposed to do. They were giving each other money and presents, but not because they were friends. They were doing it to get special favors. The politicians who were supposed to be making rules and decisions for the whole country were instead making deals with businessmen. The businessmen would give the politicians money, and in return, the politicians would make decisions that helped the businessmen's companies. Over 5,000 people were investigated, which means that special people called judges were trying to find out if they had done something wrong. And guess what? A lot of them had. Hundreds of people were arrested, including someone who used to be in charge of the whole country, Bettino Craxi. He was the prime minister, which is like the boss of all the politicians. It wasn't just a few people being naughty. It was a lot of people, and they were important people. It was like finding out that the principal of your school and a bunch of the teachers were secretly stealing money from the school and giving each other special treats. The scandal was so big that it made some of the major political parties fall apart. One of the most famous parts of this whole story happened in Milan. There was a big investigation there called Mani Pulit, which means clean hands in English. The judges in Milan were like detectives, trying to figure out who'd been taking bribes and making dirty deals. And they found a lot. They discovered that bribery was very common in the Italian government. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was more like the whole basket was rotten. Politicians and businessmen were trading favors and money all the time, and they thought they could get away with it. But they didn't. Thanks to the hard work of the judges and investigators, many of the people involved in this corruption were caught and punished. It was a very hard time for Italy, but it was also a time of cleaning up and starting fresh. After Tangentopoli, people in Italy started to demand more honesty and transparency from their government. They wanted to know that the people in charge were working for the good of the country, not just for their own pockets. New laws were made to try to prevent bribery and corruption from happening again. The story of Tangentopoli is a reminder that corruption can happen anywhere, even in countries that seem like they're doing well. 6. In Houston, there was a company, Enron. It was an energy company, which means they help provide electricity and gas to people's homes and businesses. However, something was not quite right at Enron. The bosses of the company, particularly the CEO, the big boss, Jeffrey Skilling, and the chairman, another big boss, Kenneth Lay, were hiding a big secret. For years, they had been lying about how much money the company was making. They were telling everyone that Enron was making a lot of profit, but that wasn't true. In reality, the company had a lot of debt, which is like when you owe a lot of money to someone. And you might be wondering, how did they hide all this debt? Accounting is how companies keep track of their money, how much they earn, how much they spend, and how much they owe. Enron's bosses were using tricky ways of accounting that made it look like the company was earning more money than it really was. Second, they lied to the auditors. Lastly, they made secret deals. They created sneaky partnerships with other companies to hide their debt. Their stock price was very high, and many people wanted to invest in them. But then in 2001, the truth started to come out. Some very smart reporters and financial experts started to notice that something wasn't right with Enron's numbers. This was terrible news for the more than 20,000 people who worked for Enron. Many of them lost their jobs and the money they had been saving for retirement. It was a very hard time for them and their families. Meanwhile, the bosses who had lied and cheated, like Jeffrey Skilling and Kenneth Lay, were in big trouble. They were taken to court and found guilty of fraud and other crimes. The Enron scandal was a big shock to the whole country. Because of what happened with Enron, the government decided to make some new rules to try to stop this kind of thing from happening again. They passed a law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. The Enron scandal taught us some very important lessons. It showed us that even big, successful companies can be hiding big problems. We must always be vigilant, always strive for honesty and integrity, and always remember that no one, not even the richest and most powerful among us, is above the law. We spend a lot of effort to do research and create this video. Please like, share, and subscribe.